My name is Natalie Odom. I'm 31 years old, and for the past 4 years, I've worked as a paramedic in Savannah, Georgia. I've pulled people out of burning cars. I've done CPR in a Walmart parking lot while a crowd filmed me on their phones. I've held the hand of a 60-year-old man who coded twice on the way to Memorial Health and made it both times. I thought I had seen every version of what one human being could do to another. I was wrong. I came home for Christmas to find my grandmother sitting in the dark in a house that smelled like old urine and spoiled food. Her hands were shaking. Her lips were dry and cracked. The heat had been set to 53 degrees because my aunt had told her to stop wasting money. On the kitchen counter was a handwritten note from my cousin. Gone to Charleston for the holidays. Don't wait up. Nana knows where everything is. She didn't know where anything was. She has early stage dementia. She can't find the bathroom at 2 in the morning without someone guiding her. She hadn't eaten a real meal in 3 days. And while she sat there alone in the dark in the house she'd owned for 40 years, her daughter, my Aunt Rochelle, was sipping champagne on a rooftop bar in downtown Charleston, posting Instagram stories with little snowflake emojis. What happened next cost them everything. Comment: Justice if you believe karma always arrives exactly when it's supposed to. Hit subscribe right now because what I'm about to tell you is the kind of story that doesn't end the way you expect. The drive from Savannah to Beaufort takes about 45 minutes on a normal day. The week before Christmas, with holiday traffic clogging every on-ramp on I-95, it took me almost an hour and a half. I didn't mind. I had my thermos of bad gas station coffee, a Christmas playlist on low, and the particular kind of quiet happiness you feel when you're heading somewhere that actually feels like home. My grandmother's house on Marsh Oak Road was the one constant in my entire childhood. My parents divorced when I was 7. My mom moved us to Atlanta, then Charlotte, then back to Atlanta. My dad remarried twice and eventually stopped calling. But every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, every summer for 2 weeks, I had Nana Lorraine's house. The smell of cornbread and coffee, the ceiling fan in the back bedroom that clicked on every third rotation, the old pecan tree in the backyard that she had planted with my grandfather before he died. She had named that tree after him. She called it Walter. I had my overnight bag in the back seat and a box of her favorite pralines from the shop on Bull Street in the passenger seat. I was already planning the next 4 days in my head. I'd help her wrap gifts. We'd watch old movies. I'd make her cheese grits the way she liked them, with sharp cheddar and a pinch of cayenne. I'd sleep in the back bedroom under the quilt she sewed when I was born. I turned onto Marsh Oak Road and immediately noticed that the house was dark, not just the Christmas lights. My grandmother always had Christmas lights, even the old-fashioned big bulb kind she refused to replace, but completely dark. Not a single lamp on inside. I told myself she was probably napping. I parked in the driveway behind her old Buick and grabbed my bag and the pralines. The cold hit me when I stepped out. December in the Low Country is different from real winter. It doesn't usually get brutal. But tonight, there was a damp wind coming off the marsh that cut straight through my jacket. I knocked on the front door. Nothing. I used my key. Nana? It's Natalie. I reached for the light switch. The lamp by the sofa came on, and that's when I saw her. She was in her armchair, the green velvet one she's had since before I was born. She was wearing her housecoat and one slipper. Just one. She had a thin crocheted blanket pulled up to her chin, the kind you put on a lap at a football game, not the kind you use to actually stay warm. Her eyes were open and she was looking toward the window, but she wasn't tracking anything. Nana. I dropped the pralines on the floor and crossed the room in 3 steps. I touched her hand. It was ice cold. She looked at me then, and what passed across her face was the thing that broke me. Relief so complete and so desperate that it looked like pain, like someone who had been underwater and had finally broken the surface. Natalie. Her voice was thin, papery. I didn't know when you were coming. I'm here, I said, and I was already running through assessments in my head. Skin turgor, mucous membranes, respiratory rate. I've got you. I'm right here. I touched her forehead. Cold and clammy. I looked at the empty glass on the side table next to her. I looked at the kitchen, where the dishes in the drying rack were the same ones she'd had there the last time I visited in October. When did you last eat something? I asked. She thought about it for a moment, which scared me more than anything else. Yesterday, I think. I made crackers. The peanut butter crackers. She paused. Or maybe it was the day before. I moved to the thermostat. 53 degrees. The heat was not broken. It had been manually set. There was a sticky note underneath it written in my Aunt Rochelle's loopy handwriting. Keeping this at 53 to save on the bill. Put on an extra sweater if cold. I peeled that note off the wall. I looked at it for a long time. My Aunt Rochelle is my grandmother's only daughter. She has lived rent-free in the cottage behind my grandmother's house for 11 years. 11 years of free housing, free utilities billed to my grandmother's account. Free meals whenever she walked the 20 steps from her door to my grandmother's kitchen. My grandmother never once complained. She said, family takes care of family. My Aunt Rochelle and her daughter, my cousin Tiffany, had packed up and driven to Charleston for the holiday weekend without arranging a single person to check on a 78-year-old woman with memory problems who lived alone. They had turned the heat to 53 degrees. They had left her one slipper. I stood in that kitchen holding that sticky note, and something shifted in me. I've worked enough emergency calls to know the difference between fear and adrenaline. Fear makes you freeze. Adrenaline makes you sharp. What I felt right then wasn't fear. I put the note in my pocket. I turned the heat to 74. I went to work. First things first, I needed to get her warm, get fluids in her, get food in her. I found half a can of vegetable soup in the pantry and heated it on the stove. I filled a glass of water and brought it to her and watched her drink it in slow, careful sips while I checked her over properly. No signs of a fall. No bruising. No confusion beyond her baseline. She was dehydrated and cold and frightened, but she was okay. She was going to be okay. She was going to be okay. While the soup heated, I started opening drawers and cabinets the way I do when I respond to a scene, methodically, looking for information. I found the bill folder she keeps by the microwave. I flipped through it. Electric bill, phone, water, and then a bank statement from her credit union, the one she's had for 30 years, the one she set up with my grandfather. The checking account balance was $412. I stood there a moment. My grandmother gets Social Security. She gets a small pension from the county where she worked as the school secretary for 22 years. Combined, she brings in just over $2,000 a month. Her mortgage has been paid off for 6 years. Her expenses are modest. She shouldn't have $400 in her checking account. I kept reading. There were transfers. Recurring monthly transfers of $800 going out to an account I didn't recognize, labeled only with the last 4 digits. I pulled up the online banking on her laptop. She had the password written in a little notebook next to the monitor, because she always forgot it, and found the full transaction history. 18 months. 18 months of $800 transfers, every single month to an account that I found, after some searching, was registered to Rochelle Odom Carter. My aunt had been taking $800 a month from my grandmother's account for a year and a half. She had been doing it while living rent-free in the cottage behind the house. She had been doing it while my grandmother bought the store-brand crackers and turned the heat down to 53 degrees to save on the bill. I sat down on the kitchen floor. I'd like to say I cried. The truth is I didn't. I got very, very quiet. In EMS, we call it clinical detachment. When a scene is bad enough that your emotions step back and your training steps forward. I've had it happen on bad calls. A kid. A house fire with multiple victims. You don't feel it until later. This was like that. I got up. I served my grandmother her soup. I sat across from her at the little kitchen table and watched her eat, slowly, both hands wrapped around the bowl. The color was coming back into her face. The heat clicked on overhead and she sighed when the warm air hit her. "Where's Rochelle?" I asked, my voice easy, light. "She went to see Tiffany." My grandmother nodded. "Said she'd be back after New Year's." After New Year's. She had planned to leave her here for 2 weeks. "Does anyone come check on you when she's gone?" I asked. My grandmother considered this with the careful, searching look she gets now when she's trying to retrieve a memory. "The girl from the church used to come," she said. "Sandra. But I don't think she's been by lately." She paused. "Rochelle said not to bother people during the holidays." I nodded. I kept my face neutral the way you learn to on difficult calls. "Nana," I said, "I'm going to stay through New Year's, okay? I already cleared it with work." I had not cleared it with work. I texted my supervisor under the table and called in my leave banked from the last 8 months. Every shift I covered for someone else. Every holiday I'd taken a call because I didn't have anywhere to be. I cashed all of it in right there at her kitchen table while she finished her soup. After she was settled and warm and had fallen asleep in front of the television with a real blanket over her, I sat at the kitchen table with her bank statements, her bills, and a yellow legal pad. I spent 3 hours going through everything. The picture that emerged was uglier than I had first thought. The $800 a month was the visible line item. But there were other charges on her debit card. Charges at a Sephora in Charleston, at a restaurant in Hilton Head, at a spa in Bluffton. Small charges, $40 here, $60 there, all from a debit card my grandmother had not used herself in months because she had trouble with the PIN. Someone else had been using her card. I photographed every page of those statements with my phone. Every single page. Then I went to the neighbor's house. Mrs. Patsy Gilmore is 80, legally blind in one eye, and sharper than anyone I have ever met. She has lived next to my grandmother for 31 years, and she knows everything that happens on Marsh Oak Road with a precision that should probably concern the HOA. She answered the door in her bathrobe, took one look at my face, and said, "Come in, I'll put the kettle on." I sat at her kitchen table and she told me, without my even asking, that she had not seen my grandmother outside in 8 days. She told me that she had seen Rochelle's car leave last Wednesday loaded with luggage. She told me that she had knocked on my grandmother's door on Thursday and Friday and gotten no answer, and had been so worried that she called my grandmother's phone, and my grandmother had told her she was fine, just resting. She didn't sound fine, Patsy said, setting a cup of tea in front of me. She sounded like she was just saying what she'd been told to say. I pressed record on my phone voice memo app before she started talking. I let her go. She talked for 45 minutes. By the end of it, I had a neighbor's testimony about the isolation, the loaded car, the calls going unanswered, the last several months of watching my grandmother's situation deteriorate, while Rochelle hosted parties in the backyard cottage. I thanked her and walked home through the cold. The next morning, I called my grandmother's attorney, a man named Mr. Aldous, who had been the family's lawyer since my grandfather was alive. I told him I needed to come in. I told him it was urgent. He gave me an appointment that afternoon. He was 67, methodical, and so unflappable that you could probably tell him the sky was falling, and he'd ask you to specify which direction. When I laid out the bank statements in front of him and walked him through the transfers and the card charges and Patsy's account of my grandmother's isolation, he looked at it all for a long time without speaking. "I need to ask your grandmother some questions," he said finally, "with you present." We drove back to the house together. My grandmother sat in her green velvet chair. Mr. Aldous sat across from her and asked her gently about the transfers, about the debit card, about whether she had authorized anyone to make purchases on her behalf. She had not. She didn't know about the transfers. She thought Rochelle paid her own expenses from her own account. She thought she herself had been using her debit card for groceries when she felt up to driving, but she hadn't driven in 6 months because Rochelle had been handling errands. My grandmother started to cry, quietly, the way old people cry when they realize something has been happening to them that they didn't know about. Not dramatic. Just small, tired tears. "It's all right, Lorraine," Mr. Aldous said. "We're going to sort this out." He looked at me over my grandmother's head. In that look, I understood that what my aunt had been doing had a legal name, and that name was financial elder abuse. That's a felony in the state of Georgia. I want you to understand something about my Aunt Rochelle, because it's important. She is not stupid. She is charming and well-dressed, and she has this way of making every story about herself that is so seamless you don't notice it's happening. She had told my grandmother that the transfers were for household expenses, shared costs. She had told her that the debit card charges were for groceries she was picking up on her behalf. She had been systematically draining the account of a woman with a memory condition who trusted her completely, and she had been doing it for 18 months. I needed to give her a chance to come home, not because I thought she would, but because I needed to document that she wouldn't. I texted her, "Nana isn't doing well. I'm worried. Can you come back early?" 3 hours passed. Then she gets like this around the holidays. The anxiety spikes. She just needs her routine. You being there is probably making it worse, honestly. We'll be back after New Year's. Don't rearrange her things. I read that message 4 times. You being there is probably making it worse. I took a screenshot. I sent it to my own email. Then I sent it to Mr. Aldous. I texted back, I think she needs to see a doctor. I want to take her in for an evaluation. 40 minutes this time. That's not necessary. She saw her doctor in October. Don't make a big deal out of this, Natalie. You always dramatize everything. Enjoy Christmas with her and let us enjoy ours. Screenshot. Email. Mr. Aldous. I called my cousin Tiffany's cell phone that night. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. I called again. This time she picked up on the second ring, and I could hear music and voices behind her. Natalie, oh my God, hi. We're literally about to go to dinner. Tiffany, I said, I need you to look at something. I described what I had found, the bank statements, the transfers, the debit card charges, the thermostat of 53, the one slipper, her grandmother alone for 8 days without anyone checking on her properly. There was a long silence on her end. Those transfers, she said carefully, are for household expenses. Mom's been managing things for Nana. It's a lot of work. $800 a month, Tiffany. Managing a household for an elderly person is expensive, Natalie. You wouldn't know that because you just show up for Christmas and think you understand everything. I kept my voice even. She was sitting in the dark in 53-degree heat with one slipper on. She hadn't eaten a real meal in 3 days. She does that, Tiffany said, her voice getting sharp now. She forgets to eat. That's not Mom's fault. Mom can't be there every single second. And then, you know what? We'll deal with this when we get back. Stop stirring things up. She hung up. I sat with the phone in my hand for a moment. Then I pressed stop on the recording app. I did not sleep much that night. I sat in the back bedroom under the quilt my grandmother had made, and I thought about what the next step needed to be. Because there's a moment in every difficult situation where you have to decide whether you're going to manage it or solve it. Managing it would have looked like making sure Nana was okay until they came back, having an uncomfortable family conversation, maybe setting up a care schedule. Solving it looked like what I did. Mr. Aldous came back to the house the following morning with his paralegal and a notary. We sat at the kitchen table, me, my grandmother, Mr. Aldous, and his team, and we spent 4 hours going through her financial situation, her estate documents, and her wishes. My grandmother owns the house on Marsh Oak Road outright. She owns the cottage behind it. She has a modest investment account set up by my grandfather that she has never touched and that Rochelle did not know about because it was held at a different institution under a different account number. Not a trust fund, not millions, but enough to matter. My grandmother looked at me across the table and said, Natalie, I want to change things. I want it to be you. She was very clear. Clearer than she'd been in months, I think, because she finally had someone sitting across from her who was paying full attention instead of managing her. We changed the power of attorney. We changed the beneficiary on the investment account. We amended her will. Mr. Aldous filed a report with Georgia's Adult Protective Services that afternoon. He also referred the financial records to a colleague who handles elder financial abuse cases. I called my aunt that evening. I did not tell her about any of this. Rochelle, I said, I just want you to know that I'm here with Nana and we're good. She's doing better. Have a nice New Year's. She paused, surprised by the warmth. Oh, well, good. And then don't go through her things. Of course not, I said. I had already been through everything. I had already photographed everything. I had already sent everything to Mr. Aldous. New Year's Day, I cooked. I made my grandmother a real breakfast. Eggs, grits, turkey sausage, biscuits from scratch. We ate at the kitchen table and she told me stories about my grandfather, about the early years on Marsh Oak Road when the neighborhood was all dirt roads and they had to haul water during the dry season. She told me about the year she got snowed in alone for 4 days and didn't mind because she had her books and her radio and the cat. She laughed at her own stories. I hadn't heard her laugh like that in a long time. She was still laughing when we heard the car in the driveway. I had been expecting them. I knew they were coming back today. I had prepared. I had spent the previous evening setting the dining room table with the evidence. Not dramatically. I had arranged it with the same methodical care I use when I prep a scene report. The bank statements, tabbed with sticky notes. The printed screenshots of our text exchange, A written statement from Patsy Gilmore, signed and notarized. A letter from Mr. Aldous on his firm's letterhead outlining his findings and his referral to Adult Protective Services. And in the center of the table, my grandmother's debit card, which she had never stopped to the cottage, which Rochelle had apparently kept in her own wallet for convenience. I found it in the kitchen junk drawer, still in a rubber band with a sticky note in Rochelle's handwriting, Nana's card, for errands. I had placed it on the table with the rest. I was sitting at the head of the table in my Navy paramedic uniform, not because I was going to work, but because I wanted to be very clear about who was in charge of this room. When the front door opened, Rochelle came in first. She was tanned and had a new bag I didn't recognize, large and expensive looking. Tiffany followed with her roller suitcase. They were talking and laughing, the easy noise of people coming down from a vacation, and then Rochelle looked up and saw me. She stopped. Natalie. She recovered fast. She always recovers fast. You're still here? I am, I said. Have a seat. She looked at the table. Tiffany came in behind her and looked at the table. The laughter stopped. What is all this? Rochelle set her bag down on my grandmother's clean floor. Sit down, Rochelle. She didn't sit. She crossed her arms instead. She'd always been better at offense than defense. I don't know what you think you found, but I want you to know that I've been managing this household for years. Years. While you've been in Savannah playing hero, I've been here. I've been the one dealing with the doctors and the bills and the transfers, I said. She paused. One beat. The shared household expenses, which I have every right to, $800 a month for 18 months. I turned one of the tabbed pages toward her, from her checking account to yours, without her knowledge. She knew, Rochelle said. We discussed it. She didn't know, I said. Mr. Pert. Aldous sat with her and asked her directly. She did not know. Something shifted in my aunt's face. The confident layer cracked, just slightly, at the edges. And this. I picked up the card in the rubber band, her debit card, which I found in your junk drawer, with your handwriting on the note. Tiffany made a sound. Rochelle's jaw tightened. You need to be careful about what you're implying, Rochelle said. I'm not implying anything, I said. Mr. Aldous has already filed a report with Adult Protective Services. There's an open case. The financial records have been referred to an attorney who specializes in elder financial abuse, which is a felony under Georgia law. I paused. I'm not implying. I'm informing. The color drained from my aunt's face. Tiffany sat down. She didn't have a choice. Her legs just seemed to give. Mom, Tiffany said quietly. I want to talk to Nana, Rochelle said. Her voice had changed. The confidence was still there, but there was something underneath it now, something that sounded like calculation. I want to hear from her directly. You can, I said. She's in the living room. But before you go in there, you should know that she has already sat with her attorney. She has already made changes to her estate documents and her power of attorney, and she has been made aware of every transfer and every card charge in detail. Rochelle went still. She knows, I said. And she made her choices with that information. Rochelle walked to the doorway of the living room. I didn't follow. I didn't need to. I heard my grandmother's voice, steady and clear. Rochelle, I need you and Tiffany out of the cottage by the end of the month. I heard nothing from Rochelle for a moment. Then, Mama, this is not... You don't understand what Natalie has been telling you. She's always had it out for me. You know that. You know how she is. Natalie showed me the papers, my grandmother said. I read them myself. Your memory. My memory is fine today. A pause. Please don't do that. I stood in the dining room and looked at the pecan tree through the back window. Walter, bare in December, his branches holding the gray winter light. Rochelle came back into the dining room. Her face was very still in the way that meant she was doing math. I'll contest the will, she said. I'll get a lawyer. You can, I said. Mr. Aldous expects that. He has the recordings, the bank statements, the neighbor's testimony, the text messages, in which you told me my grandmother was fine while she was sitting in a 53-degree house with one slipper on. I folded my hands on the table. He says you're welcome to try. Tiffany started crying. Not the performed kind, actual crying, the kind where you're not sure you're the good person you thought you were. I didn't know it was that bad, she said. I didn't know about the transfers. I didn't know she didn't know. I looked at her. I know, I said, and I meant it. Rochelle did not cry. She picked up her bag from the floor and she walked back to the cottage without another word. The following weeks were not clean. Nothing like this ever is. There were calls from Rochelle's personal attorney. There were long conversations with Mr. Aldis. There were hearings I had to drive back to Beaufort for. Mornings I got up at 4 to make the drive from Savannah so I could be in the courthouse by 9. The APS case moved slowly, the way these cases always do. But it moved. 6 months later, Rochelle settled. She repaid the $14,000 in transfers. She vacated the cottage. She signed an agreement that she would have no financial access to my grandmother's accounts going forward, under penalty of a civil judgment, then Mr. Pownett. Aldis described as persuasively large. She has not called my grandmother since. I moved my grandmother's finances to a new institution. I set up automatic alerts on her account. Every transaction over $50 sends me a notification. I arranged for a licensed home companion to come 3 mornings a week. Her name is Dorcas, and she is steady and warm and brings my grandmother plants from the farmer's market because she knows Nana can't resist a good philodendron. I drive up from Savannah every other weekend. The cottage behind the house sat empty for 3 months. My grandmother asked me, one afternoon in the spring, what I thought she should do with it. I told her to rent it. I told her to find a good tenant, someone quiet, someone who would take care of it, and to put that rental income directly into her own account where only she could touch it. She rented it to a graduate student from the University of South Carolina who pays on time, keeps the yard tidy, and apparently brings my grandmother tomatoes from his garden in the summer. I want to tell you something that I've been thinking about since that December night when I walked into a dark house and found my grandmother sitting alone in the cold in one slipper. I have seen a lot of bad things in this job. I have seen accidents and fires and people in the worst moments of their lives. And I've noticed that the people who cause those moments almost never look like villains. My Aunt Rochelle doesn't look like a villain. She looks like someone's mom. She wears lipstick, and she makes good potato salad, and she used to bring me birthday cards with $10 in them when I was a kid. She also stole $14,000 from a 78-year-old woman with dementia and left that woman alone in a 53-degree house over the holidays without a second thought. Both of those things are true. That is the part people don't want to sit with. That it's usually not a stranger. It's the person with the house key. It's the person who knows which account to transfer from. It's the person who knows your grandmother prefers the crackers with the peanut butter and uses that information to leave exactly enough to get by while they're in Charleston buying new bags. Loyalty isn't a blood thing. It was never a blood thing. My grandfather understood that. He planted that tree in the backyard and named it and tended it for 30 years. And it outlasted him, which is what loyalty does. It outlasts the people who practice it. My grandmother is doing better. She has good days and harder days. On the good days, she sits on the back porch and talks to Walter and drinks her coffee. And sometimes I sit out there with her when I'm up for the weekend, and she tells me stories I've heard 20 times that I would listen to 100 more. She told me once last summer that she felt ashamed that she hadn't seen it happening, that she should have known. I told her that's not how it works. When someone in your family takes advantage of your trust, the failure is theirs. Every single time. The failure is theirs. She nodded and looked at the tree for a while. Then she said, "Your grandfather would have liked to, Natalie. He always said the ones who show up are the ones who matter." I'm telling you this because I know some of you are sitting with something similar right now. A parent you can't reach by phone, a grandparent whose account doesn't look right, a sibling who has conveniently become the one managing things for an aging relative, a gut feeling you've been talking yourself out of for months because you don't want to believe it. Trust that feeling. Make the call. Drive down. Use your key. The person you love is sitting there waiting for you to show up, and they may not be able to tell you how much they need you to. But they need you to. If you believe that our elders deserve to be protected and not taken advantage of, that loyalty is something you earn, not something you inherit, hit that like button right now. Leave a comment with the word loyal if you have ever shown up for someone who needed you. And if someone showed up for you, if someone drove through the cold and used their key and made you soup and sat across the table from you while you figured out what happened, share this for them. Let them know you remember. Subscribe to Fallen Revenge because this is a community for people who believe that accountability isn't optional, and neither is love. I've been thinking about something my grandmother said the summer after everything happened. We were sitting on the back porch, coffee going cold between us, and she was looking at Walter, the pecan tree my grandfather planted before I was born, and she said, almost to herself, I kept thinking I must have done something wrong to deserve that. She didn't do anything wrong. That's the part I want to sit with for a minute, because I think a lot of people who've been through something like this ask themselves the same question. What did I miss? Why didn't I see it? And the answer, almost every time, is that they were too busy trusting someone to be watching for the betrayal. That's not a failure of intelligence. That's a failure of the other person's character, and the two things are not the same. What happened to my grandmother happened slowly, in increments small enough that each one felt like it could be explained away. $800 isn't nothing, but it isn't everything either. A sticky note on the thermostat sounds like a minor household policy until you understand the pattern it belongs to. That's how this kind of harm works. It doesn't arrive all at once. It accumulates quietly, the way water damage does, invisible behind the wall until the whole thing is compromised. I think about what would have happened if I had not driven down that December. If I had sent a gift card instead of showing up. If I had called on Christmas morning and my grandmother had said, the way she did with Patsy, I'm fine, just resting. I think about how long it could have continued, how much longer before there was nothing left to protect. The thing about cause and effect is that it cuts both ways. Rochelle's choices had consequences she didn't anticipate, because she had been operating on the assumption that no one was paying close enough attention to connect them. That assumption was the flaw in her plan. Every transfer, every card charge, every choice to get in the car and drive to Charleston instead of arranging care. Those weren't invisible, they left a record. And the moment someone with training and patience and enough love to sit down and read 3 hours of bank statements showed up, the entire structure became visible at once. Accountability doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it arrives as a notarized document on an attorney's desk. Sometimes it arrives as a knock on the door of a woman who has been watching through lace curtains for 31 years and has been waiting for someone to ask. Sometimes it just arrives as the sound of your own name being called when you least expect anyone to come. What I want to say to you, if you are in something similar, is this. Showing up is a skill. It is something you practice and choose and sometimes pay for and leave time and long drives and difficult conversations. But it is also the only thing that actually changes anything. You cannot protect someone from a distance when the threat is inside the house. You have to use your key. My grandmother is doing well. I drive up every other weekend. We sit with Walter and drink our coffee. She is still here, and she knows it, and on the good days that is enough for both of us. That's what it looks like when you refuse to look away. Not a dramatic rescue, just presence. Consistent, unglamorous, non-negotiable presence. That's the whole thing, really. That's all it ever is.